All right. Good morning. Good afternoon. Thanks to everybody as you are getting logged in. We are very excited to be with you today and to be with our speaker. If you can, it's nice to know who's in the room. So thanks for answering I guess it's 2 questions in the poll, and we'll share those results here after we get started. I'm very excited to have Adrianna Kara here today to talk about physical activity to improve mental health in adolescents. And you'll hear more about the amazing work that she and her business partner do and the whole team at their gym in a moment. So we're glad that you could make some time to be here today. We do want to start with our land and labor acknowledgement. So we do this in this virtual space, and we have for a while because we in the University of Washington, live and work, in the lands that have been, the Coast Salish peoples and all waters and all tribes and bands within the Squamish, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, and others. We say this because we actually, being in the Region 10, MHTTC, we have 272 federally recognized tribes and many that are not. And so we want to just always acknowledge and work for justice in these communities. And so we don't say this as a checkbox kind of thing. We say this because this really means a lot to us, and we really want to make sure people can learn more about the stewards of their land. And so someone will put a link in the chat to learn about that. And we also want to acknowledge the unaddressed legacy of stolen labor and slavery, and that we still have exploited workers, and the legacy of these things remain today. So we just want to acknowledge that also is a foundation of how we are in this country. My name is Christina Clayton. I'm one of the co-directors of the Northwest MHTTC, and we'll talk about now our network. Oh, nope. I'm going to tell us about the FEMA and FCC emergency alert test, which will happen during this webinar. So if everybody's phones start beeping and things happen, if you hadn't heard of it, should just be on your wireless phones. But we just wanted to acknowledge that we may need to pause if that's happening, or everybody's things are distracting you. But that will be happening today. The Northwest MHTTC is part of a network, and the MHTTC network is nationwide and supported by the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. There are 10 regional centers and a national coordinating office. We support resource development, training for the field, and we are here in Region 10, so that covers Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. We are here in the University of Washington in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. And so our goals for the center are the same as the network. So supporting best practices and EBPs, evidence-based practices, heighten awareness, knowledge, and skills, foster alliances, and address training needs in our communities, and to share free, publicly available training and TA. And how do we do that? We do things like today, we have a webinar. This will be recorded. We just recorded a podcast as well. We do learning communities. We have asynchronous online courses that are all free. So everything we do is free. Our area of focus for the network is evidence-based practices for psychosis. So our faculty and other projects do certainly focus on that, but we also cover a lot of other topics. So today is another example of just another aspect of behavioral health and mental health that we want to share with you. And if we usually run out of time, so I wanted to share these at the beginning. So our team today is Peyton, who's back there running logistics, and Amy, who's our new training manager. But if you aren't getting our newsletters or didn't know about this event directly and you want to, this is how you can connect with us. And then a couple of events coming up in the next week and after, some events you might be interested. So you can find that on our website. We'll put that in the chat. Some housekeeping, because it is a webinar. you're muted, you're not on camera, but it is going to be recorded. You do have the option for closed captioning, and we'll make sure you have a link to where you can find the webinar recording, the slides, and how to obtain a certificate of attendance if you would like it. It's not formal CEUs, but they are things you might be able to use in your area if you need that. And then for today, if you can please use chat for just tech help or saying hello or responding to something. But if you have a question for Adrianna, please put it in the Q&A and I will be monitoring that. And I think you are interested in taking them as they go along. So I want to just make sure if you just throw it in anytime something's coming up, and I'll pop on camera, or if you notice it, AJ, just let us know. We'll make sure we get that question to you. So we also just acknowledge that in our network, we share the slide because one of our goals is to use affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language, and just mindful that everybody's coming from different places and have different perspectives. And so we're just wanting to be attuned to that. And then lastly, your feedback is really, really important. We are constantly trying to think of what's the next topic that people want to hear about, what are the interests. And so you can do just a short 2-minute evaluation. It's very quick, and we don't see who answered what, but we also share that with our presenters. And so that's really helpful. And then a disclaimer, SAMHSA gives us funding, but they don't have official positions on our topic. I want to end the poll before I hand it over to Adrianna. So Peyton, okay, great. So I think the sharing the results. So who's in the room? So a lot of clinicians, therapists, case managers, educational settings. Oh, nice range of different roles. There's always a lot of other, we can only put so many options in the poll, which is unfortunate. Great to see such a spread of different folks here today. So thank you for that. And I know there'll be another poll and a word cloud coming up. So Adrianna, I know you want to introduce yourself, but thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited that you're here to talk about this, and I'll pass it over to you.
All right. Hello. Welcome. I'm sorry in advance if I have any technical issues today. This is really not a part of my normal job. Usually I'm on the floor coaching either in my facility or in a school. But we're gonna do our best. All right, so welcome. We are talking about physical activity to improve mental health in adolescents. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself first, and then we'll go on to talk about my organization, 206 South, how we got there, what's going on now, and then what our hopes are for the future. About me, I have 8 out of 10 adverse childhood experiences. I hope most of you guys are familiar with that, but basically it's a list of ultimately probably traumatic things that one could experience as a child or adolescent. And the research is depressing, I'm going to be honest. I first heard about these actually not during my psychology degree, but during mental health first aid training that I did a couple of years ago. I see a lot of you mentioned in the poll that you're in educational or behavioral setting, and it's going to be spoiler alert, it's going to be one of our questions later. But I'm seeing that a lot of you guys are working with teens. So this is really something to consider, doing a mental health first aid or a youth mental health first aid course. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but it's a 2-day course, just like learning how to perform CPR or operate an AED. But for signs to look out for different mental health issues, suicidal ideation and attempt, stuff like that. And it's really something that's, I think, not very intuitive but certainly important to consider. Anyway, so we were talking about adverse childhood experiences in this course, and I was like, "Ooh, yeah, I got quite a number of those." And then we went on to talk about um, the outlooks in adulthood for people with high ACEs, and I was like, man, I'm glad I didn't know this before because I might have taken a different path. The stats for ending up with like addiction, alcoholism, any of that stuff is really, really high. And I understand why, right? Like that trauma as a kid, if it's not properly dealt with while you're developing, can kind of resurface later in adulthood as something, maybe a less than desirable behavior. So I'll talk about a little bit how we um, aim to have a trauma informed style of coaching. And ultimately, a big part of my work is that I feel, how do I say, like it's quite healing to offer mentorship and coaching to youth when it was something that I needed when I was younger, and oftentimes I did receive it, but it's something to consider if this is something that you've experienced personally, whether it be housing instability or some kind of abuse or what have you, being able to relate to others and show youth ultimately that like, hey, I went through that too, if it's appropriate to share, and I turned out okay, and I'm successful and I'm happy now, can be really impactful for young people. So childhood was quite dysregulated. My dad actually developed a methamphetamine abuse problem. So he was in active addiction for almost 20 years. He passed away about 7 years ago, but I had not been in regular contact with him since I was about 10 or 11 years old. Um, and my parents' divorce case, actually, I'm Canadian. It went to the Supreme Court of Canada, so it was quite heated. Um, it resulted in, supervised visits with social workers and things like that. So I did have some kind of insider experience with that system as a kid. Ultimately, I went to the University of Victoria for university or college, as you guys would say. Although I did see there's a couple Canadians here as well, way to represent. And I got my Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. I did a fifth year honors project there. I took a super senior year and did my thesis on educational psychology, and it was on goal setting. So, guys, something about, I don't know about you guys, but something about talking just pops these AirPods right out of my ears. Um, so did my degree in psychology, and did my thesis in educational psychology, and we talked about goal setting. So I was starting my coaching internship parallel to that when I was about 19 years old. Started coaching classes on my own at a CrossFit gym when I was 20. And so I was coaching and doing school kind of throughout the second half of my degree. And while my thesis on goal setting was to do with academics, I worked very closely with an educational psychology PhD student named Lindsay McCardle, who had done her master's degree in sports psychology. So sports psychology was on the discussion list a lot, and talking about how we kind of, some of us have this stereotype of like a dumb jock. But really what the literature shows is that student athletes are actually more successful in their organizational and kind of task switching behavior, because they have so many more things to do than the average student, because they have practices and games or performances or what have you. And so I think that's a really interesting thing to consider, is that the athletes among us are probably some of the more organized people that you know. I wouldn't have necessarily understood that had it not been for Lindsay. And actually, one of the members of that lab at UVic, David Feinstein, is now a doctor of school psychology. and he is working at Seattle University. So we're actually collaborating on some research, and we'll talk about that kind of towards the end of like where we're wanting to go to a success. So that was a really cool full circle moment, where David and I are able to work together again, 10 years later from our first undergraduate research projects. When I was considering whether to go to grad school for educational psychology, my supervisor pulled me aside one day, bless her heart, and said, "Hey, so I see that you are really struggling with some of these grant applications. And I hate to tell you, but grant applications are the most fun part of your master's program because you haven't hit any roadblocks yet. There haven't been any issues with research or approvals or anything like that. And if you're not having fun right now, you're definitely not going to have any fun during your master's program. So I'm going to suggest that you take some time off and just kind of see where things take you. You're always welcome here. You've been an excellent student. She actually really went to bat for me and let me be a TA for a class while I was still an undergraduate, which is not a thing that's done at UVic. And she just said, take a year off, see how it goes. I'm sorry, Allison, that was 10 years ago. I never went back. But kind of during that time, it was the first fall, it was about this time of year, the first fall that I wasn't going back to school, in 20 whatever years. And I was feeling a little bit lost, and really feeling like, hey, if I'm going to do this coaching thing, I should probably be a better coach. I kind of knew, that I was like, okay, but not great. And so someone like an acquaintance that I knew from Seattle, Zach, turned out to be my business partner, posted looking for interns from outside of his gym for the first time ever. His gym had been in existence for 5 years, and he had a successful satellite coaching program, mentoring other gym owners, also kind of mirroring my experience. He had been looking for mentorship and coaching in his professional life and couldn't find any. And so he kind of created for himself what he was looking for from other people. So he posted saying that he was looking for in-house interns, and I actually just found it in my email. I put together a super geeky like cover letter and resume, which is not, the standard in the fitness community necessarily, and sent it along. And he emailed back and said, "Hey, are you looking for our satellite internship program where, you have assignments, etc., but it's mostly asynchronous and, you Skype with me once a month?" And I said, "No, I'm going to pack up my Toyota Corolla and move to Seattle and work with you if you'll have me." And so he said, "Yeah, I guess you can come." So I initially stayed for 4 months. That was about 9 years ago. And I loved it. And he thought I was a great fit for the gym. And so eventually I packed up my stuff and I moved to Seattle permanently. And now I consider this my home. So through Zach and his mentor and coach, Jeff, I learned a lot about teaching kettlebells to coaches and ultimately the art of kettlebell sport. If you're not familiar with kettlebells, it's a weight with a handle on it. And it's originally from Russia. Pavel Tsatsouline brought kettlebells here. I kind of saw their resurgence about 20, 25 years ago. And so I actually travel around the country teaching other coaches how to coach kettlebells. Zach also coached me to a world record in kettlebell lifting, which I'll talk about a little bit later when it comes to, that mentality of working out. It was something that really, really helped me push past my physical limits, and really opened up a new kind of level of mental focus and endurance that I think really parallels what we see in our teens as they begin to lift and kind of understand what's possible from themselves. Oh, here we go. Okay, so what are ACEs? ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. We talked a little bit about this already, but basically high ACEs, I talked a little bit about the mental issues, increasing the likelihood of addiction, etc. But it can also cause physical health issues as well. The rates of heart disease, etc., are much higher in people who have high ACEs. So this is something that can be linked to socioeconomic status as well. Um, Living in poverty, living with a family member who's a drug addict or an alcoholic, things like that, um, can see this kind of generational cycle repeat itself over and over. Certainly, that was the case for my family. My dad's dad passed away in a tragic accident when he was 14, and he didn't process that loss very much, if at all. He wasn't encouraged to do so by his family. And so, then ultimately, as an adult, he was suffering from a lot of pain and a lot of loss from losing his dad so young and had repressed it for a long time. And so, that was one factor that had him turn to drugs. And then, kind of continuing the cycle of then I too have high ACEs as a result of that experience. So, getting some intervention and breaking that generational cycle is something that's really important to me. And I think is something kind of to be considered. Um, as a lot of you, I think, know, working with kids, and we'll do a poll in a second as to how many of you guys are working with kids day to day. It's one of those things where you don't really know what's going on in the other, whatever 16 hours of their day when you're not around. Or in my case, I maybe only see the kids for an hour or two, and I have no idea what's going on in their family life. You know, ultimately, unless they share it, I don't know what their school experience is like, who their friends are outside of the gym. And so um, you really just want to treat every kid who walks in your door as though they need that like positive, uplifting presence that you are in their life, because you really have no idea what's going on, even if they're showing like a really brave or happy face. One day you might need to be there to chat with them about some heavier stuff. So can we actually open up the poll to say, do you work with teens? And then kind of unrelated, but how many times a week are you active, and do you consider yourself to be physically active often? Oh, heck yeah. Response is pouring in. That's it. All right. So another maybe less than uplifting part of the webinar. So in developing a trauma-informed um, coaching, or whatever your relationship is with kids or teens, it looks like almost all of us are working with teens on a regular basis, and a lot of us are pretty active, so I'm pretty impressed with you guys. So the three types of trauma that we're looking at, so involving another person, any kind of physical, emotional, mental abuse or neglect. Something not involving another person, this is a little bit more rare, but something like a natural disaster, where you lose your home, for example, can certainly be a traumatic event. And then third type of trauma, which is a little bit more of a recent addition, and goes back to some of the acknowledgments that Christina made at the beginning of the webinar, systemic trauma. So where your race, your ethnicity, your gender identity, whatever it is, your sexuality, is introducing trauma into your life because of something who you are. This can be divided further into acute, chronic, or both. Unless you are in that second type of trauma, like a natural disaster, it's very rare to experience only acute trauma. Usually it's chronic or both. And often that both would be like maybe an acute issue. And then we see that, the person is reliving or having intrusive thoughts about that same traumatic incident. Okay, so a trauma-informed approach to training, there's 6 aspects that we're looking at here. And this is something that I actually learned about pretty recently, but I would say is something that we've always been integrating into our training, kind of subconsciously or without knowing that it was so important. So safety being number one. Obviously, everyone wherever they are deserves to feel safe. Certainly in the gym, that's one thing that can feel fairly, um, how do I say, like a vulnerable place to be, or sports or what have you. You know, it's definitely something that if you've been attending for a long time, or physical activity is just something that you normally integrate into your life. So it looks like probably about 60% of the people here would maybe identify something that, it's something normal that I do often. But for those people who answered that they're active, 0 to 3 times a week, especially if you're more to that like 0 to 1 time a week kind of end of the spectrum, maybe something that's affecting that is not feeling necessarily safe. Something that comes to mind is, especially for women, but really for everybody, maybe not feeling safe as it's getting dark earlier in the afternoon, not wanting to go for a run or a walk outside because your neighborhood is not well lit or something of that nature is probably the easiest way to think about it. But there's a lot of aspects here, right? Like in our space, at 206 South, we do a lot of powerlifting. So, lifting with a barbell, testing the squat, bench, and deadlift. So, sometimes that means that there's bars dropping in the gym. We also will often attach chains on either side of the bar that makes kind of like a clinking metallic sound. So, even just down to like the noises, it kind of smells like sweat, like some of that stuff can activate some things for people. So I try and warn people, like, hey, it can be noisy, but it's not dangerous. And for some people, they just prefer to work out alone, and that's okay. Um, for the teens, I think safety first and foremost is kind of letting them know what the rules are right off the bat, and having them know that, like, hey, if, and I feel like I have to say this often to them, but hey, if I ever um, raise my voice or am really stern with you, this is something that has to do with your safety. And the reason that I'm appearing mad or raising my voice is really because I'm scared for you. I don't want to be put in that position. And so I'm going to do my best to let you know what the rules are before we get started so that we don't have to be in that position. And now that the program is a little bit more well established, I feel like the other youth present kind of send a good message or set a good example as to what's appropriate and what's not. So safety definitely number one. Certainly when we're designing programs, the rules have always been, the program first and foremost has to be safe, and then it also has to work and it has to be fun. But safe is the biggest thing, especially when you're a strength and conditioning coach for someone who has a specific sport that they do. I did see someone say that they're a wrestling coach. I think that's so awesome. But for example, if I'm training a team of wrestlers, first and foremost, I need to keep them safe and injury free so they're not worse off than when they started training with me. Otherwise, their sport specific coach or their parents or the athlete themselves would be like, well, why am I even doing this if I'm not making progress? I'm actually sliding backwards. So, both in, working with teens, programming, working with adults, working with athletes, kind of all those Venn diagrams, safety is first and foremost right in the middle. Trustworthiness and transparency. So for us, and I've actually mentioned this at our annual gala in my speech last year, the biggest thing for our organization that we really keep first and foremost is that we have consistency with the adults who interact with the kids. So I know it's not possible for a lot of bigger organizations like I don't know, what's a good example? The YMCA or something like that, often there's some staff turnover. And a lot of times it's because people are succeeding in their role and they're then promoted and they don't necessarily have a public facing or a youth facing position anymore. Um, there is also, we want to acknowledge, there's a lot of burnout in this area because it can be really draining for the providers as well. Certainly in education, that's definitely a big thing going on right now. So for us, we're lucky enough to have a small enough staff that we're really trying to keep the programs as consistent as possible for our free teen classes that we run twice a week. Zach and I are the only coaches that teach those. We might have guest coaches at times, but we are always present. For example, last week we were out of town, and so we just canceled the classes. For us, that's more important than having the kids work with someone who maybe is not as experienced as a coach or as experienced working with teens. We prefer to just handle that ourselves. And as time goes on, we'll find other kind of trusted strength and conditioning coaches who would be willing to kind of hand that baton off to. And we're really trying to be transparent with the kids as well. We don't share a lot about what's going on with our personal lives, but if we're, for example, we're just a little bit tired or we're coming down with a cold or something like that, we try and really be open with the kids and say, hey, I'm having a bit of a harder time today, for whatever reason, and we don't necessarily have to share it, but just let them know, it's nothing to do with you and everything to do with what's going on in my life right now. So I appreciate your patience and thank you guys in advance for, listening a little extra harder and making sure that, you're, as we say, rule number one is act right, that you guys are acting right. So we don't have to come down on you because something is unsafe because we're already having a bit of a hard time. Moving on to peer support. I think this is one of the biggest things that has shocked me in our youth program, how close the kids end up getting, and how respectfully they engage with each other. We have a huge age range in our program, and developmental range. Our teen classes right now, participants are anywhere from 7th grade to seniors in high school. And one of our 7th graders is like 4'7" tall. He is still, shaped like a child, whereas some of our seniors in high school, they have full beards and they're over 6 feet tall. So there's a big developmental range there too. And obviously some of those kind of physical attributes are more clear in the gym, because you're focused on it, right? Some people can lift heavier than others. Some people can coordinate their limbs better than others. Some people can do body weight movements better, whatever it happens to be. But with the kids, we've organically seen a ton of respect between themselves, whether they're friends, whether they go to the same school or different school, whatever it happens to be. For a while, the kids would all shake each other's hand very formally when they came in the gym, which I thought was hilarious. But, it's also a great skill, like awesome. You know how to do like a good firm handshake when you meet another person, like freaking awesome. Like if that's something you came up with on your own, like all the better. From that to like everyone has their own unique, like elaborate handshake that they do when they see each other. And I think one of the coolest things is that every time someone demonstrates something in a class, the rest of the class just like bursts into spontaneous applause. Because I think they really acknowledge how difficult it can be to like get up in front of somebody else and, show off a new movement or something like that. And so they really support each other that way as well. The other thing that I've been seeing more and more is that as a group, they are attending more sporting events. A bunch of us went to go see one of our kids perform in a school play last spring. As a group, they're really showing a lot of school spirit and a lot of support for each other, which is really cool to see. We'll talk a little bit about our school and our neighborhood later, but it's a it's a tough spot. The traditionally our sports teams are not very successful in our league, which is definitely changing. But yeah, it's really cool to see them go out and support their peers, whether they're a part of the program or not. Collaboration and mutuality. So giving, and this applies to adults as well, but giving some agency for kids and, teens, adults, whoever you're working with. For example, I think the easiest one to say is if we're doing a workout and I write down that it's 3 to 5 rounds and I say like, hey, today is choose your own adventure. Not only do you get to choose what weight to use in this workout, you can choose whether you go through it 3 times or 4 times, or if you're feeling amazing, 5 times. And that's completely up to you and your decision. And I think that really helps kids get enthusiastic about it, and know that like, hey, if I'm having a great day, I can do more. And hey, if I'm having kind of a less than optimal day, I can do less. And that really makes them feel, give them a little bit more agency and makes them feel a little bit more powerful. And sometimes I'll ask like, hey, is there a movement you guys want to do today? Especially if it's a smaller class, I'll let them kind of decide like, hey, do you want to do a little bit more teaching intensive class where I'm talking a lot and we're learning something new, maybe not going as heavy, or hey, do you want to do a movement that you know well where we can go really heavy and cheer each other on, and just give options as much as possible, so that they feel like they have a role in how they're developing their physical activity as well. That kind of all rolls into empowerment, voice, and choice, and getting, how do I say, like getting consent not to give feedback, but especially like, hey, can I touch your shoulder to show you what muscle you're supposed to be using? Or I'm going to stand in front of you while you're lifting to see what your knees are doing. Is that okay? Or would you like me to stand, kind of to a 45-degree angle so we're not making direct eye contact when you're lifting? Just little things like that. Really making sure that they feel safe, that we're trustworthy, we're transparent with them, kind of building back on some of the things earlier in the list, is super important, whether you're working with adults or kids, but certainly for kids and teens, making sure that they feel as though they have a good deal of agency and choice as to, what they're doing, so that when they go work with other teams or coaches or teachers or whatever, they feel confident speaking up if they feel something doesn't feel right. And then last but not least, cultural, historical, and gender issues. This is a huge one. Obviously I'm, a cis white Canadian. I don't have a whole lot of perspective on what it's like to be a not white person. But we try and make our staff and our classes as multicultural as possible. I think making sure that our prices are accessible helps get people from all socioeconomic statuses around each other, which I think is really cool to have kids, learn a different perspective, especially if they are quite privileged or maybe they have really low ACEs, to learn from other kids who maybe have not had it so easy. And I think for us, specifically where we're at, the most important thing is that we try and have as bilingual a staff as possible, English and Spanish. My Spanish is not perfect, but it is enough to, kind of teach a class in Spanglish. We're lucky enough that our local school, starting at elementary school, does have a Spanish immersion program. So a lot of the kids that have come up through our program and are now, 17, 18, 19, 20, who we are able to hire back as staff, once they've kind of gone through the program, have grown up speaking Spanish their whole life. And so, especially when we're talking to parents, guardians, etc., that helps us a lot with the with making sure that the gym's accessible and that everyone can train regardless of their level of English proficiency. And yeah, we are, I think, so lucky to see the way that our kids interact with each other. Certainly, we've had kids who have come in who are, gender fluid, or maybe they're on the autism spectrum or what have you. And seeing how our Gen Z kids welcome them with open arms, are never have any judgment, are always supportive and encouraging of each other, makes me so hopeful for the future, and has really shown me a thing or two as to like how to interact with people who are different. So that's something that I'm really proud of, is that, if a parent comes in and says like, hey, my kid is a little bit on the spectrum, or they have this issue or that issue, is it okay if they still participate in classes? The answer is absolutely. And not only our staff, but also the other participants are going to be so welcoming. And I can really say that with confidence. So that's really beautiful. All right, what's unique about weightlifting? So let's open the word cloud.
All right, 1 second. I'll be dropping a link into the chat so you can access it easier, and I will share it right now.
Oh, heck yeah. Beautiful. So if you guys want to take a minute as I'm talking, just to click on the link. Whew, let's go. All right, so as the words are popping up, let's talk about what's unique about weightlifting. I know that there are a ton of sports and physical activities that can really be beneficial for our physical health, mental health, etc. But the thing that I love about weightlifting is that the weight is always the same, and that it really feels as though, in a very literal way, that there is an obstacle in front of you that you get to conquer. So thinking about, say, running, for example, yeah, you can get a faster time. You can PR your 5K, you can maybe even win a race. But for weightlifting, the feeling of strength, which I see as a big, kind of presence in this word cloud, that feeling of strength and really kind of like vanquishing the challenge in front of you, I think is a little bit unique. And, obviously I'm a little bit biased, but for me, certainly, it really felt like when I started weightlifting, not only that like, oh man, my body is made to do this, but oh my gosh, if I can do this, this is by far going to be the hardest part of my day. And anything that comes after this, I can conquer. I can hit that challenge for sure. And I'm seeing a lot of this like stress relief, motivation. It's mostly positive words, which I really, really love. Empowerment, refreshed, better sleep, stress relief, sense of accomplishment. This is really, really cool to see. So thanks for participating, guys. I really appreciate it. Someone even said joy. I love it. So I think for us with the weightlifting, we focus on specifically in our teen program, and even in our kids programs, is a lot of strongman work, or I guess it's a bit funny. The sport is called strongman, but obviously you can be a strong man, strong woman, strong person. But really, what we're looking for in that is people having oh, hello. My screen sharing is paused. Is it paused?
You might need to just stop and then restart. Sometimes it doesn't get too happy.
Share screen. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Peyton, for being on the ball. So what we do in our programs is strongman or strong woman, strong person. So the focus in that sport is maximum power. So the implement that we use for weightlifting are sandbags. They're extremely easy and fairly inexpensive in terms of weightlifting equipment to put together. It's literally just a canvas bag. You either go to the beach, make sure it's legal where you live, or go to Home Depot and get some like sandbox sand or playground sand. You need a metal ring, a lacrosse ball, and a zap strap, and some Gorilla Tape, and you have got yourself a weightlifting implement. We have sandbags that go from 20 pounds all the way up to 250 in like 5, 10, and 20 pound increments, all the way up. And we probably have 70 sandbags, something like that. It's enormous. It's so much sand you wouldn't even believe. And what we've done is fill some of them all with sand, some of them with a mix of sand and rubber mulch, and then some of them with all rubber mulch. So the bags, at 100 pounds and less, are all about the same size, which I think is a little bit magical. It is a lot of bags. That's hilarious. Thanks. Yeah, it is a lot of bags. And it sits like right in the mat room where Christina trains. So she sees them every day, especially when they're a mess and they're spread out all over the floor. So they're all about the same size. So unless the side of the bag that has the number like paint penned on it is facing out, the kids don't necessarily know what weight the other kids around them are lifting. And we have them go through at least once a week. We have them go through the exact same warm up. We go through the exact same progression of movements. If we call on somebody to demonstrate a movement, they do, and then everyone claps. And then we just do a max out. So whatever it happens, whatever the lift happens to be, maybe you have to put the bag to your shoulder, maybe you have to throw it over your head, maybe you have to pick it up and squat with it 1 or 2 or 3 times. We just have them, try different movements and see how far they can go with it. And it's really, really cool to have the focus be not on competing with each other, but to have the focus be on what they can do for themselves. And we encourage them. It used to be when I started that we'd each have our own little like workout journal and write down all our maxes and stuff like that and what we did for training each day. Now, mostly I tell the kids like, hey, open a note in your phone and write down all their maxes there. So it's really cool to see as the months go on. We retest things probably, I don't know, every 6 weeks to 6 months, maybe once a year for some of the more like rare complex lifts, to see them growing and able to lift more, do more, be more in control of the lift. And it really brings them a lot of joy to be able to kind of like conquer that next bag or get the same lift, but have it feel so much easier for them. So yeah, I mean, I'm obviously biased, but weightlifting I think is really something that's special for them. Certainly for me, my experience growing up doing ballet and lyrical and modern and jazz dance classes, going shopping for a new leotard, I would go to the dance store and they would say, all right, well, we have one style that comes in extra large and extra long, and that's your size. So here's the one you have. And it was never the like cute leotard with like the designs or like strappy things around across the back. It was like always super plain, with stuff like, it would be like tummy control. And I'd be, I was 16. That's not what I was looking for, nor what I needed my clothes to say on it, packaging. Um, yeah. And so, and then when I came into weightlifting, I really felt like, okay, this is what my body is made to do. This photo actually on the screen, I think I'm maybe 20 or 21 in this photo. And I looked about the same when I was doing ballet, like I was always a bigger, muscular kid. And it really made me feel like when I was in dance, I really, and was never made to feel by my teachers or any of my peers, but just by virtue of staring at yourself in the mirror for 10 or 12 hours a week, you just start to think about like, oh, I wish I looked like that person. Oh, I wish I could be less. Why am I the only one in the class when we do, the boys' floor exercises, just for fun day, that I'm like excelling at those, but not doing as well with the movements that are in the girls' exam. Just kind of BS like that. I really found my place in weightlifting, and I could not be happier that we have so many young girls and women in our program, and who are also doing not only dance but all sorts of sports, including wrestling for sure. That is like one of the biggest growing, if not the biggest growing, girls sport in high school in the country. So it's been really cool to see some of the girls, especially their fearlessness in attacking a new sport, and something that's maybe traditionally not described as very feminine, but is certainly a very like powerful outlet for them. All right. Ooh. All right. So the most important lessons of, oh, go ahead, Christina.
Hey, Adrianna, sorry. There are a couple of questions. I know you said
awesome.
Maybe take them as they come up.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, yeah, just because I know we will probably run out of time, but you're doing great. So the first question is, was there a trial and error process when developing the youth program, and what did it look like to get to where you are now?
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you asked this question. We definitely had a trial and error period. I think the biggest mistake that we made in the beginning, because Zach and I are kettlebell experts, we thought, okay, great, we are going to integrate the teens into our adult classes because we didn't think we'd have very many teens. That was also a mistake. And so we thought, hey, less so than the barbell, kettlebells are, a little bit smaller, they'll be less intimidating, it's going to be great. And the feedback that we got was that it was super intimidating. We probably only had like five kids coming in consistently. They were mostly wrestlers because we'd worked with the local school, or Zach had worked with the local school for the wrestling team. And the kids said, these are horrible implements. They're so intimidating. We hate using them, and we think that more kids would show up if we didn't have to do kettlebells. So it was actually Zach's idea to pick the sandbag as kind of like our preferred implement for the kids. And we kind of did like a regress to progress approach, where we took our kettlebell list of movements and how we teach the class, which is kind of like, like a math, like an elementary school math class, like, the first lesson of the year built, and it just keeps building on each other until like, you're in high school and you're doing calculus or whatever they're doing now. So we took our list of kettlebell movements, and then we made kind of like equivalents to the sandbag movement, so we could have that really structured flow of class in the beginning, teaching the sandbag. The great thing about the sandbag, and this is getting a little bit on the technical side, but basically when you're weightlifting with kettlebells or barbells or anything like that, it's really important to have your spine in like slight extension or neutral. But if it's going into any kind of flexion, like any kind of rounding, it can be, you know, frankly, a little bit dangerous for athletes. And so we were having kids have to work with really light kettlebells, and we were having to be really strict about their spinal flexion because, you know, it was a safety issue. There's always rule number one, it has to be safe. Whereas with the sandbags, because they're an odd object, you can kind of like stone lifting, if anyone's ever seen that, you can wrap your body around the sandbag to some extent. And because you're bracing your abdominals into the sandbag, if there's some spinal flexion, it's not dangerous and it's actually part of the technique. With the aforementioned kids growing all the time and stuff like that, sometimes their body awareness isn't the greatest to start off with. And so it was really nice to have an implement where straight off the bat, we could have them lift fairly heavy without necessarily having to nitpick the technique. And then actually now, you know, several years in, I kind of pointed out to Zach, like, hey, you know, these kids are eventually going to graduate. They might go off to some kind of post-secondary. They might not be near us anymore, or they might not even be in state. And so we do want to give them a foundation with dumbbells and barbells and even kettlebells, so that when they're in, you know, say a college weight room, you know, there's not going to be any sandbags. We need to have a spot where they can work out on their own. So we've actually transitioned to using more barbells, dumbbells, kettlebells, etc. But that foundation is always going to be in the sandbags, and that's where the kids, I think, really get hooked, because they can, you know, max out their first day, because if their back isn't perfectly flat, it doesn't matter. They're not going to hurt themselves with that implement. So the answer is yes, we've had a lot of growing pains, but I think that was the biggest one, is taking our ego out of it and not thinking about the workouts that we'd want to do or what we think is fun, but making it fun for the kids. And I think simpler is better in that case, for sure.
Great. And we have another question, a couple more questions. Any barriers regarding transportation, and, you know, if you're seeing youth engaging who have high ACEs scores, are you looking at other resources to meet their needs? And I'm sure you've thought about that. But yeah, any thoughts on, is transportation an issue? How, you know, what are you seeing with the kids coming in for other needs?
This is such an awesome question. And yes, so initially, where in the gym we had, where we started the nonprofit organization, it was down the hill from the local high school in a great neighborhood called South Park. But it's quite small. And we had a lot of people coming down the hill from where the school is, in a little neighborhood called White Center. And it was just a little bit like tucked out of the way. Obviously, it worked great for the kids who lived in South Park. But ultimately, because those kids have to go up the hill to White Center for school once they get to middle and high school anyway, when we grew out of our space, we were very strict about wanting to be within a 2-mile radius of the high school where we serve the most kids. So right now, I think I want to say 1.6 miles away from our local high school, and the elementary school, or not the elementary, the middle school that one of the middle schools that feeds in there is right across the street. So we're on a direct bus route. We're right on the main drag in White Center. And so certainly, yeah, for a couple of years there, I was like, okay, well, we'll get a van and, you know, have volunteers picking up kids and driving to and from, et cetera, or at least picking up from school. But ultimately, with the growth of our program, we would have needed like a fleet of vans. And it turned out just to be way easier to move us closer to the school rather than having to transport kids to us and all the liability and stuff that comes with that. We do as much as we can offer clothing and stuff at the gym. We worked with a sister organization, Project Onyx. They are located in Iowa, if anyone's out that way. They're an awesome organization, specifically promoted towards working with kids of color. And if you can imagine in, Ankeny, Iowa, that's a pretty important thing to be doing. So they actually were gracious enough. They had a huge footwear donation. And so they were willing and able to share that with us. So they donated about 50 pairs of shoes. So we were able to distribute those to most of our youth who are participating in our weightlifting classes. Funnily enough, a lot of them end up showing up in like Crocs and stuff anyway. And they're like, Coach, I put them in sport mode. It's totally fine. So Crocs are also a sanctioned footwear at our gym as well. And then for wrestling and boxing, we actually had a donor come forward and buy probably 40 pairs of wrestling shoes that just live at the gym, kind of like bowling alley style. You just grab this shoe size that you need, and I just let parents know. And same with, jiu-jitsu, we have loaner gis and stuff, and I let the parents know, like, hey, if you can afford to buy one, great. But even if you can, like, wait a couple weeks and see if your kid even likes wrestling or jiu-jitsu, and then decide whether you want to invest, because they grow out of stuff so quickly. It just seems silly to purchase. We've had a clothing sponsor, LSKD, supply us with like leggings and shorts for the kids. So we've actually had a lot of donations in that way. For food, we generally just try and have snacks around at the gym as much as possible, and just let the kids know, like, hey, if you ever need anything, we're here and we have stuff. But yeah, most of the time it's been like food and clothing. Actually, I don't know how this happened, but I ended up on a list for like promotional stuff for a company. And so they sent us like 300 kiwis a couple months ago. And so we had like baskets of like, hey, take some fruit. Sometimes people will bring in stuff. One of our coaches, his family has an orchard, and so he'll bring in boxes of apples and stuff during the summer. Most recently, we got deodorant samples, so I put a little basket on the thing, being like, free deodorant, take one or a few. A couple adults were like, are you trying to send us a message? Like, is there a stinky kid among us? But really just, the more we're offered like actual like concrete things, the more we're able to give. And yeah, I feel very, very grateful for that. It's been really awesome too, especially to hand out like the shoes and clothes to the kids. They are just so excited. Yeah, and it really I think makes them feel like, okay, I'm a part of not just like the 206 South community, but the bigger like CrossFit and weightlifting community, which is pretty neat.
One more question kind of related to this, and I'm not sure if you have more to say, but any comments around addressing nutrition through a trauma-informed lens? No, that's not the main goal of the gym, but if you have any thoughts on that?
We've definitely had nutrition seminars for both adults and kids before. I am very lucky in that I grew up with my mom being a dietitian. So even though I obviously have a lot less formal training than an entire degree and internship, I feel pretty confident in speaking to most nutritional topics. I think the biggest thing for us is not necessarily a trauma-informed lens, but a culturally sensitive lens, because I'm not going to tell someone to eliminate or minimize a food group that is, or like a type of food that is central to their their like way of eating or their culture. It's such a food can be such an emotional thing. And it's such a social thing, especially when you have like tight family bonds. So, and that's like one way that your family comes together. So for the kids, that usually is addressed by saying, you know, if at all possible, can you just eat when you're hungry? Don't skip meals. If you're not eating breakfast, find something that's palatable to you and eat it in the morning. If that happens to be a shake or something, you know, something less than ideal, like I don't know, a protein bar, granola bar, that's fine, but get something in your system. The most important thing is that you're growing and developing. Your brain is going to continue developing until you're 25. So this is not the time to try and, like, a lot of kids are like, you know, coach, I want to get jacked. I need to get on a cut. And I tell them, no, actually what you need to do is eat and eat and eat some more, especially when you're hungry. And talking a lot about, you know, from an evolutionary psychology point of view, our brains still think that we're, you know, nomadic hunter gatherers that have inconsistent food sources. And so explaining to kids like, hey, you know, when you don't eat or when you skip a meal, your body thinks that there's no food available. And as a result, it slows down your metabolism and tries to hold on to the calories that it currently has, so that you can stay alive, because that's objective number one. If you can supply like a steady source of food every day, that's going to allow your body to understand like, hey, we're safe, and ultimately to build more muscle and keep your metabolism at a healthy rate. We have definitely had specifically young girls who have struggled a little bit with some disordered eating. And I've spoken to them from my experience with that, doing dance, and often, you know, not to say these are the only people that are affected, but I often see it's girls who are doing gymnastics or dance or wrestling or something like that, where there is some focus on being smaller is better, and you just happen to be in skin tight suits for your sport or your for your art. So talking with them about that, from my experience, saying, you know, ultimately, if you are having any kind of disordered eating, it's important to talk about it. You know, if you have a parent or a guardian or someone you trust at home, who is kind of present when you're eating more often, that's someone who probably needs to know. And from my own experience, just saying like, hey, you know what? The more you work on eating intuitively and trying to let go of those voices, the body checking, the body dysmorphia, like the more you can work through that, you have so much more mental energy for other things in your life. And that feels really good. Not to say that it's ever going to go all the way away. It's so different from other mental issues, right? Because you still have to eat 3 times a day. So you encounter it so frequently. You know, there's no way to like cold turkey stop eating, you know what I mean? So, but the focus needs to be trying to work through it and not beating yourself up every time, you know, maybe you're like looking in the mirror, spot checking, whatever. Trying to just minimize it as much as possible, work through it. Don't beat yourself up when it happens. And eventually you'll find it's not it's not taking as much of your mental energy, and it really is freeing once you get to that point. So keep working on it is kind of how I would address that. But yeah, trauma informed, I wouldn't necessarily be able to speak to that, but certainly having like a culturally sensitive point of view when it comes to food is super, super important. All right. Okay, perfect. Just going through a little bit of the comments, but it looks like everybody is good to go. If you have any more questions, feel free to put it in the little Q&A tab. So this photo is actually part of the one of our volunteer days. So one thing about the gym that I think has been really cool with this move, we moved from a 3,000 square foot facility to a facility that's over 10,000 square feet, which is really important because we're able to accommodate every kid who walks in the door, which to me is really something that I'm so proud of. Excuse me, because we really were running out of space at our old location. But the coolest thing about this this space is that the teens have really had a hand in building most of it. So they have weeded the kind of like garden area out back. They painted the lines in the parking lot, and like, you know, the little letters on the ground that says staff parking that people sometimes ignore. They put those there. You know, we measured out, you know, they're like, how big should a parking space be, coach? Like, I don't know, let's Google it, see what it says. Let's make it nice and wide so that no one needs to feel bad about their parking skills. And, you know, from hanging the blinds to laying the mats on the ground to relaying the mats on the ground because they are rubber, so they expand when it's hot outside. And when we first laid the mats, it was a huge heat wave. It was like 90 degrees or 30 degrees Celsius-ish for all you Canadians and Europeans out there. And so as it got cold in the fall, they shrank, and so we had to lay them all out again. So I think that's one of the coolest things that we found with not only like the teen classes, but kind of like 206 as a whole in the space at large, because we do also have adult programs, is that the kids feel a huge sense of ownership over the building, and are just so like respectful and caring, and take a huge amount of accountability with it. So that's something that I really appreciate. And honestly, you know, not necessarily something we foresaw, but anytime we ask for volunteers or to help with anything, it's always the kids stepping up to help, down to, you know, like mopping the floors and stuff, which is quite funny. Sometimes they say like, man, I've never cleaned a bathroom, or like, I don't know how to mop a floor. And so I show them, and then I'm like, okay, well, just make sure that you don't just do it here when you go home. Make sure that you're sharing your new knowledge and helping your parents or guardians out as well. Okay. Next up, understanding that brain-body connection. When we are stressed, our body doesn't necessarily know the difference between workout stress or emotional stress or physical stress, whatever it happens to be. So I chose this picture just to kind of remind myself and remind others. You know, I try and be really open about, you know, my dad passed away in July in 2016. And as the anniversary comes up, you know, middle of June is Father's Day, and then the anniversary of his passing is a couple weeks later. And for me, that's a really hard time of year. And it's always kind of a reminder to just listen to my body and take things a little bit slower. And that's one thing that we talk about in the kids or the teen nutrition lecture as well, is that your body just can't distinguish between all the different kinds of stress. So if there's something going on at home, or there's stressful stuff going on at school, or you're not sleeping well, or whatever it happens to be, even down to, like your gut's feeling a little irritated, or you think you might be coming down with something. Because if y'all work with kids, it's just like a giant, especially high schools and middle school, it's just like a giant petri dish of germs. I have never been so sick as when I was teaching in high school last year. And it was a smaller charter school, and it just didn't seem to matter. Just, being exposed to hundreds of people every day is a lot. And for some of our more introverted kids as well, I notice it's even more so, because they're sensing, the changes in mood and stuff when something big, like, there's a big fight at school, or there's a shelter in place because, there's rumors or substantiated claims that someone has a weapon or something like that. That stuff affects those kids a lot. And, it affects all of them, whether they know it or not. But definitely for some of the more like highly sensitive or introverted kids, I think it really like impacts them even more. So just talking about that, there are all manner of things that can make you feel a little bit more tired than usual. And that it's important to listen to your own body and not push it just because of the words written up on the whiteboard is the workout we're doing today, or the expectation is you go to the gym 2 times a week and you always have to go. I really try and remind the kids, like, hey, we're always going to be here. If you are in season for your sport, that's okay. Let us know. And, maybe we don't see you for 3 whole months. We're going to be so excited to hear how your season went when you get back. And, it's okay. Same thing, if you have finals or midterms or an assignment, or even, you get home from school and you're just so exhausted and you're like, I would rather go to sleep at 8 p.m. Than go to class. That's totally fine. I had one kid come in yesterday and they said, Coach, you'll never believe it. They're in Running Start, so they attend local community college classes and then a couple classes at their high school. And so they don't have any classes in the morning. They were like, you'll never believe it. I fell asleep last night at 11:30 and I didn't wake up till 11 this morning. I've never slept in that late. And I gave them a big high five, and said, awesome. I'm so glad you're sleeping like that, because they had shared with me that they weren't sleeping very well. And I was so excited for them, and some people might say, like, give them a little bit of crap for sleeping in so late or whatever. But for me, all I see is they're listening to their body and doing a really good job at it. That's what they needed that night. So stuff like that is so important to really hopefully install that lesson that they need to trust their own body. Oh, there we go. Steam alert time. Is anyone else's phone screaming? Okay, we'll take 1 minute just so that everyone's phones can calm down. It was 2 minutes early. Way to go, FEMA. So on time, so punctual. All right, yeah, talk about stress. Feeling a little elevated after that. For me personally, one of my biggest PTSD triggers was the phone ringing from when I was a kid. My dad would be high on whatever and call the house and be pretty verbally abusive. Yeah, I've never been so happy as when landlines became not a thing anymore and everyone has their phone on vibrate. It just makes me so happy. But man, that sound just whew, took me back to being 8 years old. So Yeah, so just, that really, yeah, brain body connection. Just making sure that, especially if you're working with teens, encouraging them to listen to their own body, own self, the best that they can. And yeah, I think to me that's one of the most important things for them, and just kind of learning to trust themselves, I think is the biggest thing, that intuition or that gut as well. Breaking the generational curse. This is a big one for me personally. So in the photo is me, my mom, and then my grandmother. And for me, I think the biggest thing, especially with a lot of these kids, is understanding what it's like to be a first generation or a second generation American, Canadian, whatever. And really feeling the effects of having immigrant parents or grandparents. For me, I saw that mostly through my mom. I'm really lucky that we have such a close relationship. My grandma, whose picture there, is my maternal grandmother, and she had a super crazy childhood story. Her mom died of starvation when she was a small child. She lived in Estonia, was eventually picked up by an orphanage, and she was adopted with her sister. Her brother was adopted separately into another family. Her adoptive family fled to Sweden as Estonia was being invaded by the USSR, and her brother's family didn't make it out. So she actually didn't know whether her brother was alive or not for, I think, over 20 years before they were reunited in adulthood. So she had a very traumatic childhood, as did my grandpa, who also grew up in Estonia, fled actually to Germany during World War II, and then eventually his family fled to Australia, and they both ended up in Canada. But definitely talking to my mom, her feelings of, growing up speaking a different language at home than at school, and then ultimately as an adult not really feeling competent in that language enough to speak to other adults, feeling a big sense of separation from her parents, growing up with an alcoholic dad, a codependent mom, and really feeling as though her parents didn't understand her experience as a Canadian, and ultimately feeling a lot closer with me as a result, and reflecting a lot about parent-children relationships, looking at her relationship as a parent with her child versus her relationship as a child with her parents. And I think that has really helped me with some of our kids. Maybe I can't relate to being the first person in my family to go to college, but I can relate to what is it like having a single mom, and just telling funny stories about, like, hey, does your mom ever do this? Like, she just comes home when she's had a bad day and there's no other parent to kind of regulate her, so she just makes up a rule and then won't admit that the rule is ridiculous. And the kids are like, oh my God, all the time. It's like, does your mom ever just make you do crazy cleaning things, like clean the walls of the house? And they're like, yeah, she totally does. So just finding whatever you can to relate to kids, and really hearing what their experiences are. I think it's so cool that so many of the kids that are in our program are really connected to their culture, whatever it may be. And so many of them are bilingual or trilingual. And I think that's really cool, is that, like, kind of reconnection to their heritage, and really little to no judgment if you're speaking English or Spanish or, some combination of the two. It's been really cool to see, some of that feeling of, like, I'm proud of who I am. I'm also proud of where my family comes from. And I'm proud to kind of be a flawless combination of it all. So about 206 South, I've covered most of this stuff. We established ourselves in January 2019. Since then, we have taught, this is an old number actually, so we've taught almost 500 kids in facility, and then I think somewhere between another 200 to 250 kids actually out of facility in schools. We've been lucky enough to partner with Why Not You Academy in the past. Oh my gosh, Summit Atlas School in the past, and then with Chief Self International High School. And we do have 100% high school graduation rate. It was really funny. One of our staff looked at me. She saw that on the website. She's like, "Is that true? That's so cool." And I was like, "You know what's cool about it is that you graduated through our program, so you're a part of that stat. Like, congratulations, you're keeping the 100% going." And she just lit up. She thought that was so neat. So, yeah, we don't, have any academic interventions going on right now formally, but certainly sometimes we'll end up, a kid, someone will pull out their math worksheet and we'll have, all the engineers and whoever's in the class and feeling confident in the adult class, come over and like, "Oh, I think I can help with this." I've definitely been known to hijack the whiteboard that we write the workouts on and start writing out, like an essay structure for somebody. So that's one thing that we would look to do in the future, hopefully, is, have a little bit more formal academic support as well. How it all began. So it actually started with the summer that my dad passed away. Zach also lost a family member who was really important to him. We call it the summer of sadness. It was quite a dark time, but we kind of rallied back together in the fall. That's actually when Zach said to me, "Hey, you're going to start learning jujitsu with me and wrestling. And you're also going to start kettlebell lifting." I was definitely more of a strength bias athlete. And so I learned to take that strength bias and, turn it towards also being a powerful endurance athlete. So that was something that was really empowering and cool. But we started hosting monthly mental health support meetings, and hosted and took the mental health first aid for adults and the course for youth. And then, we were we were unhappy with how the pricing model of our gym was, pricing a lot of people out, and just not allowing us to work with the populations that we really wanted to work with, people who were having mental health struggles. And we thought that the gym could be a really positive influence on them. And we were thinking mostly about adults, but really what we came to was, hey, we should have a kids program as well, because for both of us, our mental health struggles started in adolescence. And the more that we hosted these support meetings, they're called Live Forward. The more that we hosted these Live Forward meetings, the more we heard over and over and over again that that's where things were kind of getting to be a bit of a struggle. So we thought, if we have a teen program, if that stuff pops up, we can get these kids help a little bit faster, so they're not having to live with it for so long before it's finally addressed in adulthood. So from there, in 2018, let's start a little bit further back. In 2017, I did a year-long intensive MBA. So I went to school full-time, worked full-time. If you've done it, kudos. I don't recommend it. But I got it done, got it over with. And in 2018, I started putting together the paperwork, starting the 501c3. In 2019, we moved to South Park from our mega facility that had sports performance clinic and all this stuff. We really downsized. We applied for and received 501c3 status and had less than 20 participants over the course of the year. Obviously, in 2020, things really kicked off. We had no in-person classes from March to June, I think, like that. We just happened to have an outdoor area that totally saved our butt. And from September to December, our youth program absolutely exploded, because there just really wasn't a lot of organized activity out there. In 2021, we began working in local schools. and our program continued to grow with the addition of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and wrestling. The Power Monkey Scholarship is something that's really unique. Zach and I, because of our kettlebell expertise, are lucky enough to work with an organization called Power Monkey Fitness. Their like flagship event is they host basically a sleepaway camp for adults twice a year, once in May and once in the fall. I actually just got back from there on Saturday. And you stay in cabins like a kid. The facility is a gymnastics camp during the summer. And for 2 weeks a year, it's transformed, and it's for adults who love CrossFit or fitness or just want to like pursue a little bit more continuing education in that. So there's 10 different stations that focus on weightlifting, gymnastics, endurance, and kettlebells you could put into weightlifting, endurance, kind of whatever you wanted. And Zach's been teaching there for about 4 or 5 years now. Oh, there you go, Alexis. Alexis is one of our kids. We brought her once, and she actually received a scholarship directly from camp another year. So she's actually been able to go twice. So we are able to bring 2 of our kids to each camp that we teach at. Power Monkey is very generous to create a scholarship for us and for our sister organization, Project Onyx. And that is one thing that has been totally transformational for our kids. We've brought 13 kids so far. Alexis and then one other student, Alex, have gone twice. And we always ask, you know, when the next round of kids are going, we always ask the kids who have been before, like, hey, can you let them know what it's going to be like? And they always just say like, no, it's going to be amazing, but I can't describe it to you until you're there. Yeah, that's been one thing that's been really magical. Yeah. And, you know, for a lot of these kids, yeah, they obviously wouldn't have the opportunity. The camp cost is like $2,500 or something like that. And then you also have to get yourself to and from Tennessee. Yeah, it's really been quite magical. And, we're just so lucky to have that partnership with them. So in 2022, right along, we moved into our current facility, and currently serving over 200 kids ages 5 to 18. So quite a range. I also want to point out too that kids don't age out when they turn 18. The youth membership, which is subsidized by, I think 55 or 60% of the normal price, is valid until they turn 20. And then once they turn 20, we do have a sliding scale membership as well. So the idea being that just because you turn 18 and, you know, graduate from high school does not mean that you're, you know, fully prepared to be an adult without support or help. I think we all know that. Either we felt it or we've seen it. So to us, it's really important to make sure that young adults too are getting that support. I think that's an area that's overlooked a little bit. You know, it's easy, you know, the kids in the picture, like it's easy when the kids are cute and little, to give them a lot of support. But I think that like 17 to 25-year-old range is just as important as, you know, say 5 to 7 years old. All right. So our mission: world-class physical training in a healthy, fitness-focused community shouldn't be a luxury for the lucky few. It should be accessible to anyone with a drive and commitment to improve themselves and go beyond what they thought they might be capable of. 206 South makes that a reality in Seattle. So really just, you know, focuses or distills what we've been talking about. If you have the drive and the motivation to be an athlete, if you consider yourself an athlete, basically you are one, and you deserve to be treated as such. So a little bit about our neighborhood. 76% of students at our local high school are minorities. 2/3 of students are considered low income. Just under 50% of students meet their English language requirements. So there's a lot of people who speak English as a second language. The school is ranked 7,718th in the nation. Rough go, and 80th most diverse in the nation. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the population we're working with. There are multiple threats of violence and shelter-in-place orders each school year. That's pretty timely. Yesterday, not at school, but at a local bus stop, there was a shooting. A 21-year-old man died, and yeah, the street was shut down, and that was really hard for me to hear. I was already at the gym coaching. It was too late to cancel team classes, and so we just had them run. And one of the kids came in. I think this was the hardest thing to hear. One of the kids came in and said, "Yeah, my mom said she had to give me a ride, and I couldn't walk to the gym." And the kid said, "Well, only one person got shot. What's the big deal?" So I think that just goes to show how desensitized these kids are to this kind of violence. This is something that I, obviously had this issue in my family, but school generally felt like a really safe place. And this was never something that I was really worried about. Growing up in a fairly, well-off neighborhood in Canada. And this is something that really, really hurts my heart for these kids, that this is a possibility. So we've actually talked about too, if you feel unsafe when you're walking down the street, if you're ever in White Center, basically, and something a little bit off is going on, these are hours that we're open. You are more than welcome to come in here. You're more than welcome to use our phone anytime. You guys are always safe here, and if there's a threat, we'll deal with it. So how things have evolved: practical, accessibility, and transportation. As that question addressed earlier, we actually just moved the gym rather than trying to move the kids. We took a lot of feedback from our participants, and ultimately, moved away from kettlebells and towards more strongman and powerlifting focused styles of training. And there's levels to this. So Kalia, the one in the photo, she would hate that I'm using this photo. I'm sorry if you ever see this, Kalia. But she started with us. Zach started working with her on her wrestling team in 2018. She since graduated high school, is going to college online, and is actually part of our staff now, and is teaching the kids wrestling class. So it's really cool to see things go so full circle. And the thing that touches my heart the most, I think, for example, like Alexis being in on this webinar right now, how connected our kids stay after high school graduation, and really being a part of our community and setting an example for kids going forward, kind of like they're setting the example for the next generation and able to answer questions and have a little bit more insight into, post-secondary plans, college application process, what's important in your post-secondary plans, what's not so important, as someone who's just gone through it, rather than, me, for example, not, I have a tough time relating to the stress of applying for colleges and stuff here, because in Canada there is no SAT, and we have fewer universities than like the Boston area does in our whole country, so it's just not the same kind of stresses. So I think it's just so important for our kids who have recently graduated to be a role model for the generation upcoming, and I feel so lucky that they're staying so involved. Where we are now. So like I said, we just took our 13th kid to Power Monkey Camp. We are, or I am working more specifically with Dr. Feinstein, and we are working on developing some surveys to send to our participants and then also their parents, either monthly or quarterly, to just kind of assess, things like, do you feel safe in your neighborhood? Do you feel connected to your community at school and outside of school? And then how many times a week are you active? Are you active at 206 South? Do you participate in any sports in school? What's your GPA? How many unexcused absences do you have? Are you happy with your school experience? Are you happy with your extracurricular experience? And serving the parents on some of the same questions, and really being able to evaluate and see, we hear it anecdotally that our program is working and that we really are changing kids' lives. And I think it's so beautiful that kids feel comfortable, telling us that to our faces, because obviously it just makes our whole month when we hear stuff like that. But really being able to get some data together and see if we can show that quantitatively as well, so that, for example, when we're applying for grants and stuff, that we can show like, hey, these are the results. This is the GPA of our students versus the school in general. This is the number of unexcused absences on average for our students versus the school in general, and kind of show that like, hey, this really is increasing engagement, not only, in our programs, but in their life in general, and that's so important. Where they are now. So our kids have gone on to do some pretty amazing stuff. We have 4 graduates this year. Alexis is actually present in the chat right now. She's probably one of the most impressive young people I have ever met. She is actually attending Yale right now on a full scholarship. She butt dialed me the other week, and she was talking about running for some student government position. And the person she was talking to, well, of course I overheard, like I listened, but well, what would you do? And the person she was talking to was like, I don't know if they have like a freshman spot on that board. And she was like, well, we need to make one. We need a voice. So we joke, definitely Alexis for president one day. Another one of our students, Nigel, is going to Northern Ohio to pursue an auto mechanic post-secondary program. I think it's a degree. It just goes straight through for 3 years. So he'll be back at Christmas. We'll hear all about how that's going. One of our students, Taylor, is going to school in Georgia right now. She was a captain of her gymnastics team in her senior year of high school, has retired from gymnastics, very gracefully navigated that retire. Can you imagine retiring from something when you're 18 years old? Yeah, it's really fun finding her footing out there. And then our 4th graduate, Jadalyn, is actually staying at home and volunteering on a couple of different boards, and actually her full-time job is with another nonprofit that works for young woman empowerment. So yeah, I could not be more proud of our kids. I could talk about another 20 of them that have gone on to do such cool things, but really it just comes down to, I think I have so much faith in Gen Z, in teens and young adults now. I really just think that they're absolutely going to change the world, and yeah, I'm here for it. They can take over as far as I'm concerned. And so just to wrap things up, here's my contact info if you want to screenshot it. And I'm totally happy to get on a call, answer questions via email. Anything you guys need, if you want to get involved with something similar in your area. I have a bunch of organizational contacts kind of around the country, and also up in Canada as well. And if you guys have questions about, kind of the administrative side of, running a 501c3 or event planning, how we fundraise, anything like that, I've been open book. I feel like, rising tide, all all ships raise with the rising tide. And yeah, I'm so happy to everyone who spent the time to be here today. Christina, I think you're still muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Oh, here we go. Yep.
Sorry. Helps if the microphone is turned on. Yeah, thank you so much. I just have to say, obviously, I'm a pretty big fan, and I'm so grateful that you were willing to come and do this thing that is not what you do all day. But you just come alive talking about what you do there. And I just see it every time I go to the gym. And I will say, not only do you have young kids, but septuagenarians, all sorts of people. That's it's such a welcoming place. And so I really, really am so humbled and excited about what you do for the community and what you do for kids every day. I think, is there anything that you sort of think, oh, I forgot to share this, or here's something that came to mind? I don't know if people have another question, but I think, some things like came to my mind were, how do you welcome new kids? Like you're saying, you end up working with folks for a while, but when people are first at the gym, it is a very welcoming space. How do you explain? You can't even predict this is what's going to happen. You're going to be amazing because you show up and, but how do you explain it to folks that don't know about this program or don't understand why your gym is different?
That's such a good question. I think, like you said, I certainly light up when I talk about it, and certainly I think the enthusiasm is a little bit infectious. I try and as much as I can, like, be cool around like teens and stuff. I think the over enthusiasm can kind of scare them away. But mostly it's really just practical. Like, I try not to make anything about like, you're going to get so strong and this and that. I really just keep it so basic, like, hey, we're going to go into that room. We're going to do a warm up. We do the same warm up every day. So everyone's going to know what they're doing except you. Don't worry about it. Nobody's looking at you. Just do your best. And then we'll go up to the whiteboard and we're going to talk about what we're going to do. And then we're going to do it. And then we're going to high five. And then we're going to go home. And that's kind of the same speech for adults and kids. And I think it really just tends to like help people be at ease. Like, hey, we all had a first day at some point. And I sure remember my first day. And it was a lot. So don't worry about it. Like, really, and everyone can do it, but it's not for everyone. So that's the other thing I kind of say, like, hey, try out a couple classes, but if it's not your thing, find something that is your thing. Maybe it's dance, maybe it's Pilates, maybe it's hockey, who knows? But I think it's most important to have fun when you're doing physical activity. And if you're not, then why are you doing it? Go find something that does give you joy, because it can be like so intimidating, and there's so many other things going on in our lives, as kids and adults. So you may as well make it something that you enjoy doing. Otherwise, it's probably not going to fit into your life.
Yeah. Do kids, do they express hesitation to you? Do they seem on the fence about stuff? Like, I wonder, just what's their journey to get to your door? I know you do some work in the schools. I know a family member or a caretaker might be, thinking, or maybe they heard it from a friend. We know word of mouth is the best advertising there is. So I imagine people come in because their friends are coming, but what do you think kids are wondering about or worried about? And I know you covered some of that, but how do you get them over to let's just try it, because that's a real art and skill, for any of us doing work with people.
Yeah, I honestly don't know what makes kids so brave as to be like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. Oftentimes it's nothing to do with the parents, and I don't even meet the parents until I've known their kid for like 6 months to a year and a half. And then finally they're like, oh yeah, my dad's coming today to pick me up. Like, he said he wanted to meet you. I'm like, now, like, I could have been a serial killer this whole time. So I think it's really cool how like self-motivated the kids are at every step of the way. I honestly think it's just like word of mouth, like in schools and stuff, and kids saying like, oh yeah, maybe you'd like this, or like, oh hey, if you think you want to start going to the gym, especially if you're not old enough to go to like LA Fitness or whatever, I think their minimum age is 16. It's like, oh yeah, if you want to start weightlifting, this is where to do it. But yeah, I honestly have no idea. Like the kids ask me all, they're like, oh, did you wrestle when you were in high school? And I was like, I don't even think I knew where the wrestling room was when I was in high school. And they're like, oh, did you do like weightlifting? Like, no, dude, I hated PE. That was the only class I ever got a C in. Like bad. Like I was not a good kid. Because I didn't want to be well, actually, one traumatic day in sophomore year, I was sitting next to this really cute guy in biology, and I had to go straight from PE to biology. And he looked over at me and he was like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, why? And he's like, you're just like really red. Like, are you sure you don't need to go to the nurse? And from then on, I was just, yeah. So, I wasn't really into physical activity when I was in school. So I think sometimes like getting out of school and being in an environment where like you have a little bit more control over your surroundings helps. But yeah, honestly, maybe that's something we should ask. Like, what made you want to get started? Because I honestly have no idea. And some of these kids, like, they're so shy, they barely say a word. But they keep showing up. So awesome.
Yep,
Good on you.
Well, and here's a question someone wrote. So thank you, Alicia. How do you handle situations when kids are feeling negative or unmotivated? And do you reach out if you haven't seen someone for a while?
That's such a good question. Certainly we do, and we never make it about like, hey, you have it, unless it's a kid who's like said like, hey, I have training goals. Then they're treated as an athlete, and that's completely different, right? Like, hey, you need to be here because you said you had a goal. I'm investing in you, so you need to invest back in yourself as well. And that's a little bit more how we would, if we're helping someone want it because they want to pass a physical test to be a firefighter or, work for City Light or something like that, then that's a little bit more the attitude we take. But if it's a kid who just hasn't been around, we reach out to them and mostly we just say like, hey, we really miss seeing you. Like that's mostly what it's about. And honestly, I probably get between 1 and 3 text messages a day from kids who are explaining why they're not coming in. So they're like, hey, I'm getting a haircut today. I won't be at boxing. Hey, I have a big project due. I can't come in today. Or, hey, my grandparents are visiting or whatever it is. And I really try and let them like, hey, family comes first. Self-care comes first. Thank you for letting me know. But also like, you're not in trouble. It's okay. Yeah, so I think it's pretty few and far between that we have kids just like drop off the face of the earth because they don't feel like coming in. I think more often it's because they've like joined a sport at school or they've found, like weightlifting was kind of like the gateway, and then they found their sport. They're like, oh, this is my thing. And they really like deep dive into it. So that's been really cool to see, kids try stuff that they never, going out for a new sport is like as a sophomore or a junior or even a senior, like that I think is so special that they're willing to like put themselves out there like that, because when I feel like I was in 7th grade and I was like, oh, it's too late to start basketball. Everyone on the team is already so good. Like they're a bunch of lanky 7th graders. I didn't know what they were doing, but I felt like I was already behind. And so the fact that they're so open to trying something new is, I think, so cool, and something that I wish I could have like taken more from them when I was that age.
I'm just thinking about all the relational stuff that you all provide, right? And so whether it's a safe place, it's a safe space, it's a safe set of adults that care about them. It's trying things, and even if it didn't go perfectly the first time, that no one expects that, and just trying some of those on your way to adulthood skills and having relationships and feeling, working out as they are growing both physically and mentally and developmentally, and how they operate in the world. It's just really, I already knew from what I've observed and having kids myself, imagining, but we all remember the special people in our lives that took an interest, and so it's just really neat to hear how the gym, has and will continue. And I know you're always going to momentous efforts to try and reach out to more people and fundraise so you can do more stuff. And having boxed with some of these little, what I would say, very, a third of my age or something. It's just sweet. They're trying boxing, they're trying weightlifting, they're trying, jujitsu, and, they're just, it's really brave. So I think he's summed it up so really well, and how it does feel like a family. So I just want to thank you so much, Adrianna, for your time today. I want to thank everybody who's here and who spent the time. This is a kind of a different topic for us, but I'm so glad we made it happen, because obviously the interest in how it's just like anything, right? It's the exercise is one thing, but it's so much more. The exercise is very good for you. No question. But we'll make sure we can put the link for Adrianna. Peyton will type that in to the chat. But thank you so much. Any parting words?
I just want to say thank you so much for everyone. I know, more than anything, like investing your time is a big investment. So thank you. And thank you for everyone who is so active in the polls and in the chat and stuff. It really makes me feel less like I'm just talking to my wall and really actually interacting with you guys. So I really appreciate it.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. We will go ahead and let Adrianna go. But we'll leave the room open. Thanks to Peyton, keeping everything going on the back end and running all the stuff. And thanks for spending your time with us. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time.